Okay, hopefully everyone has your table ready to go. This is our first phyla for kingdom fungi. This is Chytridium mycota. And this is actually a newer classification. When I first started teaching this, there were only 4 phyla. And these organisms were put into the phylum that we're going to talk about next. What scientists discovered is that there are some differences between the two cell types, very subtle differences, and they weren't apparent initially until more study was done and we were able to see more things and kind of learn to look for more things. In the discovery of the differentiation in these different cell types, or internal cell types, what they found is that this is probably the most ancient of the fungal group. The cell wall is composed of chitin, as is everything in this kingdom. Some, of course, are decomposers and others are parasites. These have flagellated spores called zoospores. So anytime you see that word ZOO, which we call zoo, it's actually pronounced as zo. It's not zoology that you take, it's zoology. Okay, so in biology and science, you're going to see that, and it means animal. So these are spores that have some type of animal property to them. Okay. Zoospores are used for both sexual and asexual reproduction in this phylum. And that's one of the things that distinguishes this phylum from the phylum that it was originally classified into. Zoospores are produced in a sporangium. This is a picture of some. And that is all I've got on that for slides. So let me review that and see if I have given you what you need for your 4 columns on your study table. The phylum name is Chytridium mycota. The spore name is a zoospore. And the spore producing structure is a sporangium. And it is used for both sexual and asexual reproduction. So you could put both in that column if you want. If you're trying to conserve space, if you've got extra space, you can write both words so that you remember what both means. Otherwise, do that in the column, out the side if you need. Okay, so some of these phyla here we're going to go through rather quickly, and that we're just going to get those 4 things out. And I don't have a lot of extra things to say. When we get to some of the phyla that have fungi that you might be more familiar with, things you've encountered, I will try to add a little bit more information about those. So phylum Zygomycota is the second phylum now, and this is the one that Chytridium mycota used to be put into. We have about 600 species. They form zygospores, so that's going to be your spore type, zygospores. And they're also going to be formed in a sporangium, sporangia, plural, sporangium, singular. This is actually not grammatically correct. I probably should change that, but I've got the A and then the plural after that, so that's really not right. I don't get picky on the test if you put sporangia or sporangium. If I'm having you write it out, you get that one of those 2 forms of the word, and I know you know what you're saying. So zygospores in a sporangium. In this phylum, we find fungi in some of the soil fungi are going to be classified in this group. Some of the fungi that attack our bakery goods. I talked about bread mold earlier. There's different types of bread mold, and some of them are going to be in this group. We also have some parasites that are in this phylum. So an example is a common black bread mold, which I didn't mention that in the previous presentation. I talked about green and white. But if you see a black bread mold, chances are you're looking at Rhizopus stolonifer. And this is so named because this is a scientific name. Okay, genus and species. So one of those sometimes bonus questions I ask about, properly written scientific name of a organism we've talked about specifically by name in class. This is one that could possibly show up, or you could use it for bonus. It's named that because the stolonifers because it produces stolons. Stolons are horizontal hyphae that will grow on the surface of the bread. Since we're talking about bread, here's a specific example. And rhizoids grow down into the bread. These two terms are very similar to some plant terms that you're going to learn later when we get to the plant kingdom and talk about plant stems and roots and how they grow. Okay. Along the ground, under the ground, along those lines. So these are, again, terms. They're going to parallel each other. Okay, we're going to have the horizontal growth, and you're going to have the down into the bread or plant for plants into the ground, into the soil growth. So go ahead and get yourself familiar with those, and you'll be ahead of the game again when we get to plants. Here's a picture of our Rhizopus stolonifer. I will not ask this question on the test, this second part here. I put it on here because I want you to see that this is how fungi reproduce, basically, but I'm not going to ask you to describe it. The hyphae form two mating types. One has a positive label the we scientists put to it, and the other has a negative, and where they cross each other, they will merge, and the nuclei fuse, okay? And since they're haploid, then that forms a diploid zygote, and that's going to produce the zygospore. And it's a haplontic life cycle. In asexual reproduction, all the structures are haploid, and the spores produced are haploid. You don't wind up with a diploid. So that's kind of the differences there. So that's just kind of for your information. Want you to see that it's quite a different process than anything we've talked about previously, or we'll talk about in the future with the other kingdoms. But due to time conservation, the fact that we've lost a week or so already with transferring the class due to the closures and everything, I'm just not going to go into that detail. And we'll move on. Phylum Ascomycota. These are commonly referred to as sac fungi because many of the reproductive structures take a sac or kind of a bag-like look to them. The spores are referred to as ascospores, and the actual scientific name for that sac is an ascus. Okay, ascus. So, as I said at the beginning in the previous presentation, that the phyla are named by the reproductive structure. Okay, that may have not been so evident in the first two, but here you begin to see that an ascus. Okay, and the spores are named for the structure they're formed in. So ascospores are formed in an ascus. Spore type, spore producing structure. Spore type, spore producing structure, if you're trying to get that in your table. Okay. And this is not a phylum name. Sac fungi is not the phylum name. This is the phylum name for the first column, Ascomycota. Again, this reproduction stuff, the two mating strains merge, that's pretty common for all fungi, and we'll not worry about it. Okay. In asexual reproduction, the ascomycetes produce kinidiospores. Okay, we're going to talk about kinidiospores and asexual reproduction at the end of all of this. So don't worry about this. In that fourth column where it talks about reproduction type, you put both again, okay? So examples of Ascomycota are your red bread molds, the Anurospora species. Red bread molds, yeah. Some bread molds are not dangerous. Um, the white, the green, um, I have I have been told you can eat those. I know I have accidentally eaten the white myself because I just thought it was some dusty flour on the surface. When I got kind of into the bread, it's like there's a little bit of a fermented taste to this or something. It is not deadly. Okay. The red bread mold is a different story. Okay, I don't know all the details of what it could do to you. It's named Neurospora. I'm assuming it probably would do something to your nervous system. I don't know how serious or detailed that is because I haven't done any research on it. But one thing I have always been told, as a rule of thumb, if it's red, just stay away. Okay, um, of any type of mold and any type of um, anything. Okay, wild berries in the woods, red and white. It's like stay away. Most of the reds are probably actually you find out they're okay, but there's some that aren't and they're deadly. So the white I think are worse for the most part. Basically, just should eat anything in the wild unless you really know what you're looking at. Um, but the red bread mold, I don't know about the black at all, but I've been warned against red. So yeah, definitely throw that away if you run into that on your bread. Cup fungi, uh, another common um, name for groupings of these. This is a rather large category. Morels and truffles. These are highly valued gourmet fungi. Morels, a little less monetarily valuable, I think, than the truffles, but still, that's not to say they're not hard to get a hold of, sometimes expensive if you can buy them. Most people that I know that enjoy these know where to find their own, and they're not telling anybody where they go to get it. Some of my students in the past have had stories of having their little moral spot out in the woods that they found, and they will go out and guard it with their shotgun because they know the neighbors know where it is too. uh, and especially if it's on their property, they're gonna I think hopefully it's mostly a joke, but um, this is how highly valued they are. If you've never had them, I had a moral probably about maybe 15 years ago. I had my first moral, and I thought nothing could be worth that much trouble. Uh, yeah, it is. It's really good, and I didn't get very much for what I paid for. Okay, it was in a sauce on a meat, and yes, it was very good. I have read historically about truffles. France is the kind of place historically in the world where truffles were highly prized, probably more abundant maybe than other places. Conditions were just right. They used in medieval times they used pigs to find them. The pigs would smell them out and start digging in the leaves. I understood they grew in what's called detritus. That's a term for decaying leaves and organic matter on forest floors. Okay, and so around the roots of oak trees is what I've read, where these are typically or were typically found by the pigs at the time. I I have been told, though I do not know if it's accurate or not, that they still use pigs to find them today. Uh, they may have a more scientific approach that I'm not aware of, and I don't, like I said, don't know. But I do know that there are accounts in history where the nobility would pay the truffle, basically the mushroom's weight in gold for it. Okay. Now, mushrooms are lightweight, right? Okay. So, gold is kind of heavy, but still, gold's pretty valuable even in small quantities. So these are historically, and I understand still today, pretty highly prized, tasty fungi that wealthy people will pay a lot to get. And I will say that I've had morels, but I have not had truffles. And the morels were expensive enough. Okay, when you have to buy them, you're not finding their own. Sorry, I think I've hit my mic a couple of times there. I talk with my hands. In this grouping, we also have some not so fun ones. Powdery mildews, leaf curl, chestnut blight, Dutch elm disease. Uh, these are all things that attack trees. They can attack nut trees, fruit trees, shade trees. in our yards, along our streets. The Dutch elm disease was highly devastating to this country in the 70s. We lost Dutch elm. We not only lost Dutch elm, but our Native American elm we found was somewhat susceptible to this, and it just wiped out large numbers of elm trees. What this the long-term effect on this, some studies have commented on. They've made some correlations, at least, to things that were happening. And what we had is in our towns and large cities, a lot of them had had tree planting efforts in the 30s and 40s. And so by the time you've got the 70s coming around, the early 70s, it's like, I don't know, 72, 73 maybe, maybe a little earlier than that even, this Dutch elm disease spread. You had 30 and 40-year-old trees that were beautiful. And if you have looked at an elm, it arches. It's one of the trees that just have a beautiful arch. Um, so they had planted these in streets along street sides, and so you'd have these tree-lined streets where the trees would meet in the middle of these arches just hanging over, um, and that was like totally wiped out. And unfortunately, they had planted the pretty much the same type of tree throughout the cities, and this sudden death of all the vegetation, pretty much, okay, along these streets, lining these streets, suddenly left the air without any of the natural plant filtration that had been used to. And there is a correlation between this and the rise of smog in larger cities. Okay. At the same time, you could say, well, people were driving more in the 70s. We were getting more cars on the road than we had previously. And this is somewhat true, but some of the studies that looked at this that I have read said that the increase in traffic and cars on the roads did not spike as much as the amount of pollution spiked in the atmosphere, in the air. Uh, and so there had to be another explanation for it. And the other thing that was going on at this time was the death of these elm trees. So the importance of having vegetation in cities and towns and places to help filter the air is kind of brought forward here. People thought after this happened, well, we'll just go plant more trees. You know, we want our shade back. They hadn't these studies about looking back at history and trying to figure out parts of the cause of the smog and sudden pollution that seemed to happen overnight, almost in the 70s, didn't happen until years later. But at the time, people missed their shade trees. They missed these beautiful streets that had been tree lined, and it would take 20, 30 years to grow something back. But they thought, well, let's get started, and they went in. They planted other trees, not elm, but others that have nice spreading limbs, and they wouldn't grow. They couldn't get them to grow; they'd die. So when we get to the plant kingdom, I will tell you a story, okay, about a tree there that uh, was kind of a help, a little bit of a help with that, and again taught us something about pollution. Okay, so more to come on that topic. Stay tuned.